This is the opening section of a report written by Austrian doctor Johannes Flückiger in 1732. Über die sogenannte Vampirs oder Blutesaugers, so zu Medvedja in Serbien an der türkischen Grenze, den 1732 geschehen. In short, a report about a chilling encounter in 18th century Serbia regarding vampirism. In the quiet, desolate stretches of the Balkans, where the mountains loom like silent sentinels, and the dark forests hide the secrets of centuries, there is a name that sends a shiver down the spine of those who know it. Arnold Paole. His name was once spoken in hushed tones, as if the mere act of saying it out loud could summon something malevolent, something that could forever alter your fate. In 1718, the Habsburg monarchy had annexed most of Serbia, which previously was part of the Ottoman Empire. The area remained in Austrian control until 1739, with the signing of the Treaty of Belgrade, and then the Turks took full control. In those 20 years, the boundaries were under direct military rule from Vienna. Due to the devastation caused by the Austrian-Ottoman War, the region was in poor condition, with a small nomadic population mainly focused on cattle instead of other types of agriculture. Austria, seeking economic development, recruited militiamen known as Hajduks to protect the borders and serve in the military during war times. In exchange for border protection and military service, the Hajduks were promised parcels of land in return. Many answered the call and joined or formed communities to claim their new land, including one particular Hajduk, Arnold Paole. Having faithfully served for the Austrians, Arnold moved to a sparsely populated area in Serbia to claim his piece of land. Being a region of vast open countryside and dense forest, many dangerous animals roamed free. Brown bears, wild boars, and even grey wolves. And as for the local populace, they were a superstitious lot, their lives intertwined with folklore and dark legends. This was an area where superstition was rife, where the line between the living and the dead seemed thinner than the fog that blanketed the land at dawn. Arnold Paole was not someone who was arriving in the village unscathed from his previous military service. As he candidly recalled to his new neighbours, he'd once endured a shocking encounter, admitting he'd been the victim of a vampire attack in a place called Kosovo, which today is in modern-day Kosovo. He continued, to rid himself of this creature, he had to find its grave, eat the soil from it, and smear the blood of the vampire all over himself. The villagers were well aware that he likely had to dig up the grave to do this. They were not unaccustomed to such practices, and in fact, they admired his candidness. The years rolled by, and it was now 1725. Arnold Paole was hitching a ride on the back of a hay wagon. And then, a divot in the track, a rock in the way, whatever it was. The hay wagon had jolted to one side, throwing Arnold off into a ditch. Rushing to see what had happened to his passenger, the cart driver found Arnold, still and lifeless. Arnold was dead, his neck broken. The former Hajduk, a likable man who'd settled so well in the village, was gone. The locals were stunned, saddened, and they paid their respects. He was buried in the local graveyard. And the town quickly moved on, everyone doing their best to survive the harsh conditions of rural Serbia. And then, no less than 3 weeks later, on a bright, sunny morning, 4 individuals running around the village in panic, all screaming the same disturbing revelation. They'd been visited the previous evening by the undead, by Arnold Paole. The other village folk didn't know what to do. Calm them down? Talk to them? Let it settle? The village elders took counsel and decided to watch over the suspected victims. Days passed, and then all 4 individuals were found dead. No sign of an accident. No explanation. They had just died. What was happening? Some of the people could remember Arnold Paole talking about how he'd been plagued by a vampire in Kosovo and how he'd rid himself of it. A meeting was again convened. The village elders did not take this lightly. They had to do something. In a strong yet fearful agreement, they decided it was best to take matters into their own hands. And so, a mere 40 days after the death of Arnold Paole, the villagers entered the cemetery to open his grave. Inside lay his corpse, shockingly showing no signs of decomposition. In fact, it appeared that fresh blood had recently flowed from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. The nails on his hand and feet, the hair on his head, had all seemingly grown in length. His shirt, his shroud, in fact the inside of the coffin, was just all covered in blood. There was no mistaking this. They were staring at a vampire. Immediate action was required to prevent this monster from striking again. In accordance with local customs and practice, they knew what had to be done. A wooden stake was forcefully driven through his heart. The corpse shrieked, groaned, and bled out. He was indeed a vampire. To ensure a certain end to this despicable creature, they cut off his head and threw the body onto a burning pile. The villagers knew they had to repeat this ghoulish ceremony and disinterred Arnold Paole's 4 victims. They had to do it to prevent them from becoming vampires. And that spelled the end of Arnold Paole and the end of the vampires in Medvedja. Or so the village thought. 5 years later, it's now 1731, and out of nowhere, 17 people fall ill and inexplicably die in just a matter of weeks. The age of the victims spanned from 10 years to older people in their 70s. After becoming ill, they'd complained of stabbing sensations in their sides, chest pain, fever. One of the girls who died, a girl named Stanoska, became terribly ill the same night she woke up screaming that a boy who suddenly and mysteriously died weeks before had visited her at night and had tried to strangle her. Things were getting out of control. The villagers, seeking governmental assistance, reported the deaths to the Austrian military commander in charge of the administration of the area. he was dumbfounded. But fearing a possible epidemic, he sent for an infectious disease specialist, Imperial Contagions Medicus Glaser, who was already stationed at the nearby town of Parachin. Glaser visited Medvedja, but failed to find any signs of infectious diseases. In fact, he blamed malnutrition for all of this. But the villagers rebuked his conclusion. They weren't having any of that. They knew what it was. It was vampires. Some even threatened to abandon the village for their own safety unless the authorities found and disposed of the vampires plaguing them. Glaser agreed to exhume some of the bodies, and what he found shocked him. Some of the recently deceased showed no signs of decomposition, and also had fresh blood around their mouths, very similar to Arnold Paole. Unsure of what to make of all this, Glaser reported back to the Supreme Command in Belgrade, recommending that the military execute the vampires as requested by the villagers. Back in Vienna, word of these strange events reached the ears of the Austrian emperor. He couldn't believe it. He immediately ordered an inquiry into the deaths. Regimental Field Surgeon Johannes Flückinger, along with 2 officers and 2 other military surgeons, was sent to Medvedja to learn more about what had happened. After journeying their way from Austria in just under a week, the group arrived at the village. Flückinger and his men wasted no time at all and quickly set up a base of operations. But literally within hours of arriving, 2 more people just dropped down dead. Working alongside the villagers, Flückinger ordered a group of local men to dig up the earlier victims. The medical team, performing crude on-site autopsies, discovered some of the corpses even had fresh blood in their organs, and the locals testified that the corpses appeared younger than when they had died. The gruesome process of digging in the graveyard continued, until 40 corpses were disinterred, 17 of which showed no signs of decomposition. Flückinger was a man of science, but he couldn't explain any of this. He conceded that it was just best to follow the old rituals of the region. It was just confusing. Perhaps there were just some things in life that defied the laws of nature. And in agreement with the village elders, all 17 corpses were staked, beheaded, and burnt, their ashes disposed of in the nearby Morava River. As for the decomposed bodies, they were laid back to rest in their graves. Before packing up, the Austrians went a little further with their investigation. Witness accounts and timeline of events. And indeed, the information was forthcoming. They discovered that the first 4 victims to die years earlier had all one thing in common: Arnold Paole. The former Hajduk had obviously been the cause of this horrendous set of events. And finishing with his official report, Flückinger put down in writing what they had found. The bodies were das Vampirenstand, in vampiric condition. It appeared that this terrifying spate of vampirism was finally over. Flückinger's report was forwarded to the Austrian emperor. Later, the findings of the report would be circulated to a much larger audience across Europe. So what was the real cause of this terrifying string of events? Does modern science have an answer? Had there been an epidemic of some kind? Perhaps an unknown disease of the time? Oh yeah, there are contemporary theories that sound reasonable enough, if you're a believer in science. But honestly, given how convoluted and complex the reasoning is to give a solid theory without holes, isn't vampires a simpler explanation? No one has definitive proof of what actually caused all the deaths. But if you do believe in vampires, it certainly provides a straightforward answer to the once strange happenings in this small Serbian village.